So I know they say no one mourns the wicked, but after watching this film, I am not sure anyone is going to be praising it either. Hey everyone, this is D Movieman, a fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And of course, once again, I'm coming to you all with my out of the theater thoughts. Again, out of the theater, look at me, I'm on a roll. This time for Wicked for Good, directed by John M. Chu and starring everybody that was in Wicked Part 1. And essentially the continuation of that story 5 years later. Elphaba, Glinda, Fiyero, and Co., the Wizard, Madame Morrible, everyone in this second piece of the overall story. Now, starting with my pros, I think that a lot of what worked in the first film is present here, including the visuals, the costume design, the instrumentation, the voices, of course. So much of that works here, and it's enjoyable, it's impressive, it's all the things. And then of course, seeing the continuation of the story as I know it, having seen the stage musical, was also enjoyable. It's just like I had such anticipation just waiting for certain things to be revealed. I'll just say that. And I was very curious to see what the execution of that was going to be. And I can say that I enjoyed seeing those elements, and I think, again, I appreciate John M. Chu's direction and just his practical approach to this story and to this world and to these characters. And I think ultimately that is what I enjoyed immensely. And that's something I absolutely think carries over from the first film into this one. Now, jumping over to the cons. Okay. So the thing is, Wicked for Good is decent, it's serviceable, it works, but it also doesn't at the same time, which is why I'm kind of not surprised that there's been a mixed reception to this. I think the big problem for me is that everything, because I didn't know this, but apparently even within the original stage musical, Act 2 has always gotten a lot of criticism because of how rushed and how everything is handled from a structuring and pacing standpoint. It's just kind of like Act 1 functions one way and it feels like Act 2 functions a very different way. It's still one whole, but the second half of the whole isn't nearly as effective. And I can absolutely say that was the same issue here. I just think tonally, this didn't work. I think the performances didn't really work. Some of the visuals didn't really work. It was so bizarre. And I think maybe part of this might be because they filmed both films at the same time, but obviously some aspects of Wicked for Good were filmed before the first film. So I think we end up with this very disjointed feel where the characters are more lived in, assuming that they may have done, I think just depending on what got filmed when, I think that might be why part 1 has a different sort of energy and maybe a bit more of an impact. And I can't say that for sure because I don't know what they filmed day to day to day. But I will say that it won't surprise me if some of this was filmed before, because it just seems like the characters, for whatever reason, don't feel as lived in. They don't feel as emotionally deep, nuanced. I don't know. It's just a lot of the elements that worked the first time just don't seem to work here. And I also felt like the tone was off. And I also think that considering that this was 2 hours and 10 minutes, 2 hours and 17 minutes supposedly, but it felt more like 2 hours and 10. And then the first film was 2 hours and 45 minutes. It's just like, okay, we may as well have just like rounded it up to, again, 2 hours and 45 minutes because this felt extremely rushed, which is often the same criticisms that are aimed at part 2 of the stage musical. I felt that even more so watching this. And I guess because you would think with the film medium, you can explore so much more and do so much more, but it's almost like they had to cap it somewhere, and then they just said, okay, sorry, we got to wrap it up. Because it was just like, how are we hopping and skipping and jumping over all of these moments that should have much more of an emotional impact? And it left me a lot colder than I thought it was going. Like, I'm shocked because, I was ready to cry. I definitely was tearing up, and it takes a lot to get me to cry. But, I definitely teared up. I definitely had the feels in the first one. And then here, I never really had that. I never really had the emotional heartstrings tugged. And that was probably the biggest disappointment for me. It's like, this is an emotional story. It's a story with so many political allegories and messages and symbolism and so on. But I just felt none of that was evident here, save for maybe a moment or two. And even that didn't feel... It just didn't feel. How about that? I didn't feel it, and I just didn't feel. And I think that's the biggest problem. Like, the first film made me feel a whole lot of things I didn't expect to feel. Whereas this second film, ironically, actually feels like what I thought the first act was going to be. Or even when it was first announced, I was like, oh, this might be a mess. And, seeing Wicked Part 1, I was like, oh, no, it's not. They did a great job. And then watching this part, I was like, okay, this is more of the messiness that I was expecting to feel watching the first film. So I think it's another one of those situations where you have two halves of a whole, much like Kill Bill Volume 1 and Volume 2, and, a variety of other films, where it's just something about that second half that just doesn't hold up the way that the first one does. And it still is impressive considering what John M. Chu, the cast, crew, what everyone has done and all the work that has gone into this. But I would be remiss if I said that this film, considering how much excitement I had for it, that it didn't let me down more than a clock tick. How about that? So, once again, this is D, Movieman, signing off, and I'll see you at the movie.